Before we get started, give this video a like and subscribe if this kind of deep dive storytelling is your thing. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? The dawn of December 1st, 1948, broke over Somerton Beach with a hush that belied the enigma about to unfold. The South Australian coastline, usually a tableau of gentle surf and pale sand, was painted in the soft gold of early morning. Joggers and dog walkers traced their familiar paths, the sea air brisk and salted. But on this morning, a solitary figure drew the gaze of passers-by. A man, well dressed in a suit and tie, lay slumped against the low stone seawall, his head propped at an unnatural angle, legs outstretched, feet crossed as if in repose. He could have been sleeping, but there was a stillness to him, a finality that unsettled those who looked too long. The first to notice was John Lyons, a local jeweler out for a swim. He paused, squinting at the motionless figure. The man's shoes were polished, his suit pressed, incongruous against the sand. A half-smoked cigarette rested on his collar, as though it had slipped from his lips in the midst of a final thought. Lyons hesitated, then moved on, assuming the man was drunk or sleeping off a rough night. He was not alone in his assumption. Others passed by, their curiosity dulled by the ordinariness of the scene. Only when the sun rose higher and the beach began to fill did someone finally approach and, with a tentative touch to the man's cold cheek, realize the truth. Police arrived quickly, led by Detective Sergeant Lee. The man's body was carefully examined where it lay, the sand undisturbed around him. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no evidence of a struggle. His hands, resting loosely at his sides, were clean and unmarked. His face, though pallid, was composed, almost serene. The only oddity was a trace of spittle at the corner of his mouth and the peculiar position of his arms, one bent, the other straight. The crowd that gathered watched in uneasy silence as the body was lifted onto a stretcher and carried away. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. Who was he? What had happened? The police, for their part, were left with more questions than answers. The man had no wallet, no identification, not even a hat. Every label had been meticulously cut from his clothing, as if someone had gone to great lengths to erase his identity. The pockets yielded only mundane items: a train ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket that had never been used, a box of matches, a comb, a pack of cigarettes, and a half-eaten stick of juicy fruit gum. The initial assumption was natural causes, perhaps a heart attack or a stroke. But the autopsy would soon dispel such notions. Dr. Dwyer, the pathologist, noted a curious congestion of the organs, especially the spleen and liver, and a peculiar breakdown of the blood in the stomach. No visible wounds, no broken bones, no evidence of trauma. Poisoning, he suspected, but tests for common toxins revealed nothing. The man's last meal, a pasty consumed several hours before death, offered no clues. The cause of death was officially recorded as unknown. As the investigation unfolded, the mystery only deepened. The man's appearance was striking: tall, well-built, with gray-blue eyes and light brown hair, neatly combed. His hands were uncalloused, his nails clean and manicured. His shoes, though sand-dusted, bore the unmistakable wear of someone accustomed to walking long distances. His calves were unusually developed, leading some to speculate he might have been a dancer or athlete. Yet there was nothing in his pockets, nothing in his clothing, to hint at his name or origin. Detective Lean and his team canvassed the area, questioning hotel clerks, shopkeepers, and taxi drivers. No one recognized the man. No one had seen him arrive. The only lead came from a witness who recalled seeing a man matching the description near the seawall the previous evening, standing motionless as the sun set over the water. He had not moved for hours, the witness said, as if waiting for something or someone. The press seized on the story, dubbing the unknown victim the Somerton Man. Headlines blared across Australia. Mystery body on beach, no clues to identity. The public was captivated, drawn to the case by its sheer inscrutability. Letters poured in from across the country, from families searching for missing sons, from amateur sleuths offering theories, from the curious and the concerned. But none could provide the answer that mattered. Who was the man on the beach? Days turned into weeks, and the case grew colder. The Somerton Man's body, embalmed and preserved, was put on display at the Adelaide morgue in the hope that someone might recognize him. Hundreds filed past the glass, peering at the lifeless face, searching for a flicker of familiarity. But no one came forward. The man remained a cipher, a question mark in a city unaccustomed to such mysteries. The police, desperate for a breakthrough, expanded their search. They scoured missing persons reports, checked passenger lists, and traced every item found on the body. The tickets yielded nothing. The cigarettes, purchased at a local kiosk, were a common brand. The combs were of American manufacture, but widely available in Australia. The orange wax thread used to repair a pocket was rare, but not unique. Each clue, examined and re-examined, led only to further dead ends. As the investigation stalled, rumors began to swirl. Some whispered of suicide, of a man driven to despair by unknown troubles. Others spoke of murder, of a killing so carefully executed that it left no trace. A few, their imaginations fired by the Cold War tensions of the era, hinted at espionage, a spy eliminated by shadowy enemies, his identity erased to protect secrets beyond imagining. The Somerton Man was buried in a pauper's grave at West Terrace Cemetery, his headstone marked only with the words, "Here lies the unknown man found at Somerton Beach, December 1st, 1948. But the case refused to die. In the months and years that followed, new clues would emerge, clues that would transform a simple mystery into one of the most enduring enigmas in Australian history. For now, though, the city of Adelaide slept uneasily, haunted by the image of a man alone on a moonlit beach, his secrets buried with him in the shifting sand. The city of Adelaide awoke to headlines that spoke of mystery, but behind the closed doors of the police station, the mood was not one of excitement, it was of mounting frustration. Detective Sergeant Lean stood over the belongings of the dead man, laid out with clinical precision on a cold metal table. Each item was catalogued, each thread scrutinized, but the sum of the parts told them nothing of the whole. The man from Somerton Beach was a cipher, and every attempt to decode him only deepened the enigma. The first and most immediate puzzle was his clothing. The dead man had been found in a tailored brown suit, a crisp white shirt, and a smartly knotted tie. His shoes were of fine quality, recently polished, the soles showing wear but not neglect. Yet as the officers turned out each pocket, a pattern emerged that chilled the room. Every single label, every manufacturer's tag, every laundry mark, every identifying stitch had been meticulously cut away. Even the inside of the man's hat, where a name or shop might have been pressed into the sweatband, had been stripped bare with surgical precision. There was no wallet, no driver's license, no ration card, no monogrammed handkerchief, nothing that could anchor this man to a name, a place, or a past. Lean called in his team. "Look at this," he said, holding up the jacket. "Whoever did this didn't want him found. Not by us, not by anyone." The silence that followed was heavy. In post-war Australia, people disappeared, but they left traces, family, friends, a job, a history. This man had not. He was a ghost in a world that prided itself on knowing its own. The items in his pockets were ordinary, yet their very ordinariness became suspicious. There was a train ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, and used, a bus ticket from the city, used, a small comb made of aluminum, another of plastic, a half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum, a box of Army Club cigarettes, but with Kensida's cigarettes inside, and a small box of Bryant and May matches. Each object was examined for fingerprints, for hidden compartments, for clues written in invisible ink. None were found. The cigarettes, a minor detail, became a point of fascination. Why would a man carry one brand in a packet of another? Was it a simple matter of preference, or a subtle signal, a code meant for someone else? The detectives could only speculate. The tickets were traced, but no one remembered selling them to the man. The combs were common, the gum unremarkable. The matches, the cigarettes, the tickets, each was a dead end. Lean dispatched officers to every tailor in Adelaide, hoping someone might recognize the suit's cut or the unique orange wax thread used to repair a pocket. But the thread was foreign, unavailable in Australia, and the suit style was generic enough to pass unnoticed. The trail grew colder by the hour. The man's physical features were catalogued with the same thoroughness. He was estimated to be in his early 40s, about 5 feet 11 inches, with a strong build and hands that bore no trace of manual labor. His nails were manicured, his skin unblemished. His hair was light brown, tinged with ginger, combed back neatly. His face was broad, his chin square. He had wedge-shaped toes and unusually developed calf muscles, details that, in isolation, meant little, but together suggested a man who walked often, perhaps on city streets, perhaps in dance shoes. The pathologist's report was clinical, but the effect was unsettling. Here was a man who had cared for his appearance, who had lived well, and yet who had been erased as thoroughly as if he had never existed. The press, starved for details, seized on the mystery. No name, no clues in Beach Death, blared the headlines. The public was enthralled, but for the detectives, the attention brought only more pressure. Families with missing sons, brothers, husbands flooded the station with photographs and descriptions. Each was compared to the dead man. Each was found wanting. The Somerton Man matched no one. Days turned to weeks. The body, embalmed and displayed in the hope of recognition, became a grim attraction. Hundreds filed past, searching for a spark of memory, a flicker of kinship. None came. The morgue attendants grew accustomed to the steady stream of hopefuls, each leaving with disappointment etched on their faces. The man's features, so ordinary and yet so distinctive, belonged to no one in Adelaide, or so it seemed. The police turned to the broader world. They sent photographs and fingerprints to every state in Australia, to Scotland Yard, to the FBI. The replies were uniform, negative. No one was missing a man who matched the description. No one claimed him. As the investigation faltered, theories multiplied. Was he a foreigner, a traveler who had met with misfortune far from home? Was he a fugitive, hiding from enemies who had finally caught up with him? Or was he, as some whispered, a spy of his identity erased by design? His death the final act in a drama no one would ever fully understand? The detectives, methodical and daunted, refused to give up. They scoured hotels and boarding houses, searching for a guest who had vanished without paying his bill, for a suitcase left behind, for a landlord who might recall a quiet tenant with sad eyes. They found nothing. The man had left no trace, not in the city, not in the country, not in the world. The lack of clues became its own kind of clue. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure this man could not be identified. The removal of labels was not the work of a moment. It was deliberate, careful, almost ritualistic. The absence of a wallet, of papers, of any personal effects, spoke of planning, of intent. This was not the random death of a vagrant or the careless end of a drifter. This was something else, something colder, more calculated. The city buzzed with rumor. Some said the man had come from the sea, a sailor washed ashore by fate. Others claimed he was a jilted lover, driven to despair by heartbreak. A few, their imaginations fired by the times, whispered of espionage, of secret codes and midnight meetings. But the police, bound by fact and evidence, could only catalog what they knew, a man with no name, no past, and no clues. In the end, the absence became the story. The Somerton Man was buried in a pauper's grave, his headstone a testament to the limits of knowledge. Here lies the unknown man found at Somerton Beach, December 1st, 1948. The file was marked unsolved, but the case was far from closed. For in the shadows of Adelaide, and in the minds of those who had touched the mystery, the question lingered. Who was the man on the beach, and who had gone to such extraordinary lengths to erase him from the world? The Somerton Man lay in state, not in the grand halls of the powerful, but in the sterile, echoing chill of the Adelaide morgue. Yet there was something regal, almost defiant, in the way he was dressed, a final assertion of dignity in the face of oblivion. As the city's detectives and pathologists gathered to study the body, they found themselves drawn again and again to the details of his attire and the peculiarities of his physique. Each observation was a thread, and they hoped, perhaps, that enough threads might weave a tapestry of truth. He wore a single-breasted brown suit, expertly tailored, the fabric of a quality not often seen in post-war Australia. The jacket fit his frame with a precision that spoke of money or, at the very least, of pride. His white shirt was freshly laundered, the collar stiff and unwrinkled, and his tie, patterned but understated, was knotted with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to formality. His socks matched, his shoes were polished to a muted shine, and his fingernails were clean and neatly trimmed. Even in death, the Somerton Man was immaculate. Detective Lean, who had seen his share of vagrants and drifters, could not help but remark to his colleagues, "This is not a man who's been living rough." The others nodded, their eyes lingering on the pressed trousers, the carefully mended pocket with its rare orange wax thread. He could have walked out of a boardroom, another detective mused, or a ballroom. But there was more. The man's body, once stripped of its fine clothing, revealed further mysteries. He was in his early 40s, perhaps, with a strong, athletic build. His hands were uncalloused, the palms unmarked by labor. His skin was smooth, unmarred by scars or tattoos. His hair, a light brown with hints of ginger, was cut short and parted with military precision. The pathologist, Dr. Dwyer, noted the man's unusual calf muscles, well-developed, almost pronounced, as if he had spent years in physical training. His toes, wedge-shaped and compact, suggested the long-term use of pointed shoes, the kind favored by dancers or perhaps by men in uniform. The press, starved for new angles, seized on these details. "A gentleman in death," read one headline. Who was the well-dressed stranger? The public's imagination ran wild. Was he a foreign diplomat, caught up in matters of state? A fugitive aristocrat, fleeing a shadowy past? Or a dancer, as some speculated, whose last performance had ended on the sands of Somerton Beach? The detectives, for their part, were torn between admiration and suspicion. The man's appearance was so carefully curated, so deliberately maintained, that it raised as many questions as it answered. Why would someone so evidently concerned with his image take such pains to erase his identity? Why the meticulous removal of labels, the absence of personal effects? Was it a matter of pride or of necessity? Was he hiding from someone or from something within himself? The city's tailors were summoned, each asked to examine the suit, the shirt, the tie. Some recognized the cut, but none could place the customer. The orange wax thread used to repair the pocket was a curiosity, unavailable in Australia, imported from America or the United Kingdom. Whoever fixed this pocket, one tailor remarked, had access to things most people don't. The detectives took note, but the lead went nowhere. Speculation turned to the man's profession. The well-developed calves and wedge-shaped toes pointed to a life of movement, perhaps a ballet dancer or a long-distance runner. But there were no calluses, no injuries, none of the telltale signs of a career spent on stage or track. Some wondered if he had been a military man. His haircut, his bearing, the precision of his dress all hinted at discipline. But there were no dog tags, no medals, no insignia. The mystery deepened. The autopsy revealed little more. The man was in excellent health, with the exception of a slightly enlarged spleen and some congestion of the organs. There were no signs of disease, no evidence of malnutrition or neglect. His teeth were in good condition, with several distinctive dental features, but none that matched any records in Australia or abroad. The pathologist, frustrated, could only conclude that this was a man who had taken care of himself, who had lived well, until, suddenly, he had not. As the days passed, the detectives found themselves returning to the morgue, to the silent figure on the slab. They studied his face, searching for clues in the set of his jaw, the arch of his brow. They examined his hands, looking for the scars of old wounds, the calluses of forgotten trades. They found nothing. The Somerton Man remained as he had been found, immaculate, inscrutable, and alone. The city, too, became obsessed. Rumors swirled in the cafes and pubs of spies and secret lovers, of lost fortunes and hidden crimes. Some claimed to have seen the man before, walking the streets of Adelaide with a purposeful stride. Others whispered that he was a foreign agent, killed for what he knew. A few, their imaginations fired by the romance of the unknown, insisted that he was a prince in exile, a dancer whose final act had ended in tragedy. But for all the speculation, the truth remained elusive. The Somerton Man's appearance was a mask, carefully constructed and resolutely maintained. Behind it lay only questions. Who was he? What had brought him to Somerton Beach on that fateful night? And why had he taken such extraordinary measures to ensure that, in death, he would remain a mystery? The detectives pressed on, driven by equal parts curiosity and duty. They traced every thread, followed every lead, but the answers remained just out of reach. The well-dressed stranger had come to Adelaide, and in doing so, had left behind a riddle that would haunt the city for generations. The Somerton Man's pockets, when finally emptied under the stark lights of the Adelaide police station, yielded a collection of objects so mundane that they seemed, at first, almost laughably ordinary. Yet, as each item was catalogued and examined, the ordinariness itself became a kind of riddle, a silent testament to the care with which this man's identity had been wiped away. The detectives gathered around the evidence table, their faces drawn and expectant, waiting for some overlooked detail to leap out and break the case wide open. But what lay before them was a study in deliberate anonymity. There was a train ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, and used and unremarkable, its edges crisp, its ink still bright. The ticket seller at the station remembered nothing of the man who purchased it. No one recalled seeing him board the train. Next to the ticket, a bus stub from the city, this one used, suggested a journey taken but not completed, a movement through the city that led nowhere. The bus driver, when questioned, could not remember the face of the man who had pressed the ticket into his hand. A small aluminum comb, its teeth unbent, was found alongside a plastic comb of a different make. Both were common brands, available at any corner pharmacy, sold by the thousands. The detectives sent officers to every chemist in Adelaide, hoping for a receipt, a memory, a name. They found nothing. The combs were as anonymous as the man himself. A half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum was next. The gum, still soft and fragrant, was a detail that seemed almost intimate, a reminder that the man had, at some point, expected to live long enough to enjoy it. The detectives unwrapped a stick, examining it for fingerprints, for hidden messages, for anything that might link it to someone, somewhere. But the gum was just gum, and the packet bore no clues. Then there was the box of Army Club cigarettes, a familiar sight in post-war Australia. But when the detectives opened it, they found it held not Army Club cigarettes, but Kinsidas, a different, cheaper brand. Was this a simple matter of thrift, or a subtle signal, a code meant for someone else? The officers debated the point late into the night, but the cigarettes, like everything else, refused to yield their secrets. A small box of Bryant and May matches completed the collection. The matches were standard issue, their tips unstruck. The detectives checked the batch number, traced the distribution, interviewed shopkeepers. The matches, it turned out, could have been purchased anywhere in the city, by anyone. Each item was photographed, dusted for prints, and sent to the forensics lab. The results were depressingly uniform. No prints, no markings, nothing that could be traced. The possessions were so ordinary, so perfectly nondescript, that they seemed almost deliberate, a calculated effort to blend in, to pass unnoticed, to leave no trace. Detective Lean stared at the evidence table, frustration mounting. It's as if he wanted to be invisible, he muttered to his partner. Or as if someone made him that way. The partner nodded, his gaze lingering on the train ticket. Or maybe he was running from something. Or someone. The detectives canvassed the city, showing the items to hotel clerks, bartenders, shopkeepers. No one recognized them. No one remembered the man. The tickets, the combs, the gum, the cigarettes, the matches, each was a dead end, a thread that led nowhere. The public, hungry for answers, seized on the details. The newspapers published photographs of the items, inviting readers to come forward with information. Letters poured in from across Australia, each offering theories, memories, suspicions. But none matched the reality of the man on the beach. The possessions remained unclaimed, their secrets intact. The detectives turned to the broader world. They sent descriptions of the items to police forces in other states, to Scotland Yard, to Interpol. The replies were uniform, negative. No one was missing a man with such possessions. No one recognized the pattern. The case grew colder by the day. The possessions, so ordinary, became a kind of taunt, a reminder that the Somerton Man had passed through the world without leaving a mark. The detectives, methodical and relentless, refused to give up. They traced every lead, followed every clue, but the answers remained just out of reach. In the end, the possessions became a symbol of the case itself, ordinary, unremarkable, and utterly untraceable. The Somerton Man had come to Adelaide, and in doing so, had left behind a riddle that would haunt the city for generations. The clinical chill of the Adelaide mortuary was a world away from the sun-bleached sands of Somerton Beach, yet it was here that the Somerton Man's final secrets were meant to be revealed. The city's pathologist, Dr. John Dwyer, stood over the body, his instruments gleaming under the harsh overhead light. Around him, the air was thick with the quiet urgency of expectation. Police officers, detectives, and coroner's assistants watched as Dwyer began his meticulous work, all hoping that the knife and microscope would yield what the city's best investigators could not: an answer. The first impression was of a man in the prime of life. The Somerton Man's physique, strong, well-nourished, and free of disease, offered no hint of the fate that had befallen him. His skin was healthy, his organs appeared largely normal. There were no wounds, no bruises, no broken bones. The only outward sign that anything was amiss was a faint trace of blood-tinged saliva at the corner of his mouth, a detail that seemed at once trivial and ominous. Dr. Dwyer worked methodically, his hands steady as he opened the chest cavity and examined the organs one by one. The heart was sound, the lungs clear. The stomach, however, told a more ambiguous story. Its contents, a pasty, eaten several hours before death, were unremarkable, but the lining was congested and the blood within showed signs of breakdown. The spleen was enlarged, nearly twice its normal size. The liver was congested, the blood vessels engorged. These findings, while not conclusive, suggested that something toxic might have been at work. The detectives pressed Dwyer for answers. Could it have been poison? They asked, their voices hushed but urgent. Dwyer nodded, but with caution. It's possible, he replied, but if so, it's not one of the usual suspects. Tests were run for the common poisons of the day: strychnine, cyanide, arsenic, digitalis. Each result came back negative. There were no telltale crystals in the stomach, no chemical residues in the blood. The pathologists considered more exotic toxins, those that might break down rapidly in the body, leaving no trace. Curare, perhaps, or a rare barbiturate. But the technology of the time was limited, and the tests were inconclusive. The Somerton Man's body offered up its secrets only reluctantly, and then only in whispers. The detectives, frustrated, turned to the man's medical history. But there was none. No scars, no evidence of past surgery, no signs of chronic illness. The teeth, while distinctive in their arrangement, showed no dental work that could be traced to a local dentist. The hands, so often a record of a man's life, were smooth and unblemished. The nails were manicured, the fingers free of calluses. There was nothing to hint at a trade, a hobby, or a history of violence. The coroner's inquest, held in the weeks following the discovery, became a theater of speculation. Witnesses were called, experts gave testimony, and the city's newspapers reported every detail with breathless intensity. Dr. Dwyer's findings were presented in full, but the conclusion was maddeningly vague. The cause of death is not known. Poisoning is suspected, but not proven. The lack of answers only fueled the rumors. Some whispered that the Somerton Man had taken his own life, using a poison so rare or so advanced that it defied detection. Others insisted that he had been murdered, the victim of a plot so sophisticated that it left no trace. A few, their imaginations fired by the Cold War tensions of the era, suggested that the man had been a spy, his death the result of a secret mission gone wrong. His killers armed with toxins unknown to civilian science. The police, bound by the limits of evidence, could only record the facts. The Somerton Man had died suddenly, without struggle, without pain. His body bore no marks of violence, no signs of disease. His possessions were ordinary, his clothing immaculate, his identity erased. The cause of death remained a mystery, as impenetrable as the man himself. The inquest concluded with a verdict that satisfied no one: death by unknown cause. The file was marked unsolved, but the case was far from closed. For in the shadows of the city, and in the minds of those who had touched the mystery, the question lingered: what killed the man on the beach? And why had he taken such extraordinary measures to ensure that, in death, he would remain a mystery? The Somerton Man was buried, but the investigation continued. Detectives pored over the autopsy report, searching for overlooked details. Forensic scientists revisited the tissue samples, hoping that new techniques might yield new answers. But the years passed, and the trail grew colder. The cause of death remained elusive, a ghostly presence at the heart of the case. In the end, the autopsy became a symbol of the mystery itself: thorough, methodical, and ultimately inconclusive. The Somerton Man had come to Adelaide, and in doing so, had left behind a riddle that would haunt the city for generations. In the weeks after the Somerton man's body was discovered, the investigation had begun to settle into a frustrating rhythm of dead ends and unanswered questions. The city's detectives, once galvanized by the hope of a swift resolution, now found themselves mired in a fog of uncertainty. Yet, as fate would have it, the most significant clue in the entire case remained hidden, tucked away in a place so unlikely, so easily overlooked, that its discovery would seem almost miraculous. It was late January 1949, nearly 2 months after the body had been found. The Somerton man's possessions had been examined, catalogued, and re-examined countless times. His suit, so meticulously tailored and so curiously stripped of labels, was being inspected once more by Detective Sergeant Lean and his team. The detectives, their eyes weary but their resolve unbroken, ran their hands along every seam, every fold, every pocket, hoping, perhaps, for a miracle. And then, in the small fob pocket of the man's trousers, an inner pocket so discreet it might have been missed by anyone less thorough, Detective Lean's fingers brushed against something stiff and foreign. He paused, heart quickening. Carefully, he turned the pocket inside out, and from its depths, he withdrew a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of paper, no larger than a thumbnail. The room fell silent as Lean unrolled the scrap. The paper was thick, almost glossy, and on it, printed in an elegant, foreign script, were 2 words, Tamám Shud. The detective stared, transfixed. The words were unfamiliar, their meaning obscure, but there was something about their presence, hidden, secreted away in a hidden pocket, that sent a chill through the room. The scrap was sent to the government analyst, who confirmed that the words were Persian, meaning ended or finished. The phrase was most famously associated with the final page of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a book of poetry that had enjoyed a resurgence in popularity in the years before the war. The analyst noted that the scrap had been torn with precision, as if by a steady hand and for a specific purpose. The implications were immediate and unsettling. Was this a suicide note, a final message from a man who had chosen to end his own life? Or was it a warning, a signal, a code meant for someone else? The detectives debated the possibilities, their imaginations racing. The presence of the scrap, hidden so carefully, suggested intent, an act of concealment, perhaps even of defiance. The newspapers seized on the discovery, and the phrase Tamám Shud quickly became synonymous with the mystery itself. Headlines blared, "Cryptic clue in beach mystery. What does Tamám Shud mean?" The public, already captivated by the case, now had a new obsession. The phrase appeared in shop windows, in letters to the editor, in the whispered conversations of strangers on trams and in cafes. But for the detectives, the discovery was both a breakthrough and a torment. The scrap was a clue, yes, but it was also a riddle, one that seemed to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Why had the man gone to such lengths to hide the paper? Why those words, and why in Persian? Was he sending a message to someone, or to no one at all? The search for answers led the police to every bookshop and library in Adelaide. They scoured the shelves for copies of the Rubaiyat, comparing the typeface, the paper, the printing. They interviewed scholars, poets, and linguists, hoping for insight. The phrase Tamám Shud echoed through the corridors of power and the back alleys of the city, but no one could say for certain what it meant in the context of a dead man on a beach. It was during this feverish search that another breakthrough occurred. A local man came forward, claiming to have found a copy of the Rubaiyat in the back seat of his car, parked near Somerton Beach on the night of the man's death. The final page of the book had been torn out, and the typeface matched that of the scrap exactly. Inside the book were further mysteries, a phone number, a fake code, and the shadow of a story yet untold. But that was still to come. For now, the detectives stood in the dim light of the evidence room, the tiny scrap of paper held between tweezed fingers, and wondered at the mind of the man who had hidden it. Was he a poet, a philosopher, a spy? Was he sending a message, or erasing himself from the world? The words Tamám Shud hung in the air, final, enigmatic, and utterly haunting. The Somerton Man's secret was out, but its meaning remained as elusive as ever. The case, once a simple matter of identification, had become something far stranger, a riddle wrapped in a mystery, a story with no ending. And in the heart of that story, a scrap of paper, bearing two words that would echo through history: Tamám Shud. The scrap of paper, with its cryptic Persian phrase, had electrified the investigation. Tamám Shud, ended, finished, was a message, but to whom? The detectives found themselves at a crossroads, the case slipping from the realm of the ordinary into something altogether stranger. The words haunted them, echoing through the corridors of the Adelaide police station and the city's collective imagination. But it was not until the connection to a book, a rare and enigmatic volume, was made that the mystery deepened into something almost mythic. Detective Sergeant Lean, driven by a mixture of frustration and obsession, ordered a citywide search. Every library, every second-hand bookshop, every lost and found was conned for a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The poem, first translated into English in the 19th century, was known for its meditations on fate, mortality, and the fleeting nature of life. It was a favorite among soldiers and romantics, a book that seemed to whisper of secrets and endings. But why would a dead man on a beach carry its final words hidden in his clothes? The search seemed hopeless until a stroke of luck, or fate, intervened. In early July 1949, a local chemist named John Freeman approached the police with a strange story. Months earlier, on the very night the Somerton Man was found, Freeman had parked his car on Jetty Road, a short walk from Somerton Beach. When he returned, he discovered a copy of the Rubaiyat lying on the back seat. At the time, he thought little of it. Perhaps it had been left by a friend or a stranger in need of reading material. But when the news broke about the Tamám Shud scrap, Freeman realized the significance of his find. The book was brought to the station, and the connection was immediate and chilling. The final page had been torn out with surgical precision, and the typeface matched exactly the scrap found in the Somerton Man's pocket. The detectives gathered around the volume, their hands gloved, their breath held. This was no coincidence. The book was a message, a clue, perhaps even a confession. But the mysteries did not end there. Inside the back cover, faintly penciled, were 5 lines of capital letters, seemingly random, some crossed out, others underlined. It was a code, or so it seemed, and it would baffle cryptographers for decades. Below the code, another clue, a local telephone number, written in a hurried, almost desperate hand. The detectives called the number. It belonged to Jessica Thompson, a young nurse living in Glenelg, just minutes from Somerton Beach. When questioned, Jessica denied knowing the dead man, but her reaction, visible shock, averted eyes, told another story. She admitted to owning a copy of the Rubaiyat and to teaching English to a mysterious man during the war, but insisted she had no idea who the Somerton Man was. The detectives left her house with more questions than answers. The book itself became an object of fascination. The Rubaiyat was no ordinary volume. Its verses spoke of fate and the finality of life, of the impossibility of returning to the past. The moving finger writes, and, having writ, moves on, read one of its most famous lines. The detectives could not help but wonder if the Somerton Man had chosen these words as his epitaph, or if someone else had chosen them for him. The press, ever hungry for sensation, seized on the story. Death on the Beach, the Persian puzzle, screamed the headlines. The public poured over the verses of the Rubaiyat, searching for hidden meanings, for clues to the dead man's identity. The book became a symbol of the case itself, a riddle, a poem, a story without an ending. But for the detectives, the discovery was a double-edged sword. The book was a clue, yes, but it was also a labyrinth. The code inside resisted all attempts at decryption. The connection to Jessica Thompson raised more questions than it answered. And the meaning of Tamám Shud, ended, finished, remained as elusive as ever. The investigation now straddled two worlds, the tangible reality of a dead man on a beach and the shadowy realm of poetry, code, and fate. The Rubaiyat connection transformed the case from a simple whodunit into a meditation on the very nature of mystery. Was the Somerton Man a spy, his message concealed in verse and cipher? Was he a lover, sending a final, poetic goodbye? Or was he, as some whispered, a victim of forces beyond comprehension, his death the punctuation mark at the end of a story no one would ever fully understand? The detectives pressed on, their days and nights consumed by the search for meaning. But as they pored over the verses of the Rubaiyat, as they traced the faint lines of code and the trembling hand that wrote them, they could not escape the feeling that the answer was always just out of reach, hidden in the spaces between words. In the silence between breaths, in the final, punning phrase, Tamám Shud. The city of Adelaide had already been gripped by the strange poetry of the Somerton Man's death, but when the matching Rubaiyat surfaced, the case shifted from the realm of the improbable to the truly uncanny. It was a moment that seemed to split the investigation in two, before the book and after. The discovery was not made by a detective or a forensic expert, but by chance, as so many crucial moments in the Somerton Man case would be. It was early July 1949, 7 months after the body had been found, when John Freeman, a local chemist, stepped forward with a story that would send shivers through the investigative team. On the night of November 30th, 1948, the very night the Somerton Man was last seen alive, Freeman had parked his Hillman Manx on Jetty Road, just a short walk from Somerton Beach. He had left the car unlocked, as was common in those days, and thought nothing of it until the following morning, when he returned to find a slim, battered book lying on the back seat. At first, Freeman assumed the book had been left by a friend or perhaps a careless stranger. He tossed it into the glove compartment and forgot about it. It was only months later, when he read in the newspaper about the mysterious Tamám Shud scrap found on the dead man's body, that he remembered the book. With a sense of unease, he retrieved it and brought it to the police. The detectives gathered around as the book was produced, a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, its cover worn, its pages yellowed by time and handling. The final page was missing, torn out with a precision that matched the scrap found in the Somerton Man's hidden pocket. The typeface was identical. There was no doubt. This was the source of the message, the physical link between the dead man and the cryptic phrase that had haunted the investigation. But the book was more than just a match for the scrap. Inside, on the back cover, faint pencil marks revealed a further layer of mystery. 5 lines of seemingly random capital letters, some crossed out, others underlined, arranged in a pattern that suggested a code. Below the code, a local phone number was scrawled, the digits pressed into the paper with a trembling, urgent hand. The detectives stared at the book in silence, the weight of its implications pressing down on them. The object was so ordinary, a book of poetry, found in countless homes and libraries across the world. And yet, in this context, it was transformed into something sinister, almost talismanic. It was as if the Somerton Man had left behind a breadcrumb trail, a set of clues designed to be found, but never fully understood. The car itself became a focus of the investigation. Freeman's vehicle had been parked just blocks from where the body was discovered. Had the Somerton Man himself placed the book there, in a final act of misdirection or despair? Or had someone else, perhaps an accomplice or a killer, left it behind as a warning or a signature? The detectives canvassed the area, questioning residents and shopkeepers, but no one had seen anything unusual that night. The car, like the book, had become a vessel for secrets. The press, already intoxicated by the case's poetic overtones, seized on the discovery. "Book of Death Found Near Beach Mystery," screamed the headlines. The public, drawn to the romance and the horror of the story, speculated wildly. Was the Somerton Man a spy, passing messages in code? Was he a jilted lover, leaving behind a final, cryptic farewell? Or was he simply a man who had chosen to vanish, erasing himself with the same care that he had erased the labels from his clothes? For the detectives, the book was both a breakthrough and a curse. It provided a tangible link between the dead man and the world he had left behind, but it also raised new and more troubling questions. The code inside the back cover resisted all attempts at decryption. The phone number led to Jessica Thompson, whose connection to the case would only grow stranger with time. And the act of abandoning the book, so deliberate, so theatrical, suggested a mind at work that was both methodical and deeply troubled. The Rubaiyat itself became an object of fascination. Its verses, filled with meditations on fate and the finality of life, seemed to echo the Somerton Man's own journey. The moving finger writes, and, having writ, moves on, read one of its most famous lines. The detectives could not help but wonder if the book was a confession, a suicide note, or a challenge to those left behind. As the investigation pressed on, the book remained at the center of the storm, a silent witness to a death that refused to be explained, a relic of a night that had changed everything. The Somerton Man had left behind no name, no history, no trace. But in the battered pages of a Persian poem, he had left a riddle that would haunt Adelaide and the world for generations. The battered copy of the Rubaiyat was already a Pandora's box for the detectives, but as they pored over its pages and scrutinized every inch of its battered cover, they found something that made the room go still. A phone number, penciled faintly in the back, just beneath the lines of mysterious code. The digits were pressed into the paper with a hurried, almost trembling hand, as if written in a moment of desperation or fear. Detective Sergeant Lean read the number aloud, and a hush fell over the team. For the first time, the case had a living thread, a possible connection to someone who might have known the Somerton Man, or who might have played a role in his final, cryptic days. The number was traced to a residence in Glenelg, a quiet suburb just a stone's throw from Somerton Beach. It belonged to a young nurse named Jessica Thompson. The detectives approached Thompson's modest home with a sense of anticipation and unease. The house was neat, the garden well tended. When Jessica answered the door, she appeared composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition and something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. She invited the detectives in, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea. The officers explained the nature of their visit, showing her the book and the penciled number. At the sight of the Rubaiyat, Jessica went pale. She pressed her lips together, her gaze dropping to the table. "No," she said quietly, "I don't know this man. I've never seen him before." But her voice quavered, and the detectives noted the way her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. When they showed her a plaster cast of the Somerton Man's face, Jessica's reaction was even more pronounced. Her body stiffened, and she looked away, refusing to meet their eyes. The detectives pressed her gently. Had she ever owned a copy of the Rubaiyat? She nodded, admitting she had once given a copy to a man she'd known during the war, a man she called Alf Boxall. But she insisted she hadn't seen him in years, and that she had no idea how her phone number had ended up in the book found near the dead man. The room was thick with tension. Jessica's young son played quietly in the next room, oblivious to the storm gathering in the parlor. The detectives asked more questions about her work, her friends, her movements on the night the Somerton Man was found. Jessica answered carefully, but the officers couldn't shake the sense that she was holding something back, that she was protecting a secret too dangerous or too painful to share. Outside, the detectives conferred in hushed voices. Jessica Thompson's connection to the case was undeniable. Her phone number in the book was a thread tying her to the dead man, to the code, to the mystery that had gripped Adelaide. But was she a witness, a lover, an accomplice, or something else entirely? The press soon caught wind of the new development. Rumors swirled through the city. Who was the nurse from Glenelg? What did she know about the man on the beach? The public, already enthralled by the case's twists and turns, now had a face and a name to fixate on. But Jessica, for her part, withdrew from public view, refusing further interviews, her life forever shadowed by the enigma that had landed, unbidden, on her doorstep. For the detectives, the discovery of the phone number was both a breakthrough and a torment. It offered the tantalizing possibility of answers, but also the risk of deeper, more dangerous secrets. The Somerton Man, once a nameless cipher, now seemed to have reached out from beyond the grave, drawing a living woman into his orbit and leaving behind a question that would echo for decades. What did Jessica Thompson know, and why did she seem so afraid to tell? The Glenelg house stood silent after the detectives left, but the air inside was thick with secrets. Jessica Thompson, known to friends as Jo, sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cooling cup of tea, her mind racing. Outside, the world pressed in, the relentless curiosity of the press, the whispers among neighbors, the persistent, searching eyes of the police. But it was the memory of the dead man's face, shown to her in the stark light of official inquiry, that haunted her most. Jessica had denied knowing the Somerton Man. She had insisted, voice trembling but resolute, that she did not recognize the photograph, that she had no idea how her unlisted phone number had ended up inside the battered rebellion. Yet the detectives had seen the flicker of recognition in her eyes, a momentary widening, a sharp intake of breath, the way her gaze darted to the window as if seeking escape. It was a reaction that spoke of something deeper than mere surprise. The police dug into her background. Jessica was a nurse, trained during the war, known for her discretion and calm under pressure. She had lived in Glenelg for several years, raising her young son alone. Her past, on paper, was unremarkable, but those who knew her sensed a guardedness, a habit of holding herself apart. She had few close friends, no known romantic entanglements, and a reputation for privacy that now seemed less like shyness and more like self-preservation. Rumors began to swirl. Some said Jessica had been involved in clandestine wartime activities, liaison work, perhaps, or something darker. Others whispered that she had once loved a man who vanished, a man whose fate was never spoken of. The detectives, sifting through fragments of her life, found little to confirm these stories, but the shadows only grew longer. When pressed about the rebellion, Jessica admitted she had once given a copy to Alf Boxall, a man she'd met during her wartime nursing. The police tracked Boxall down in Sydney, alive, and well, his copy of the book still intact. The lead fizzled, but the sense of something unsaid lingered. Why had Jessica reacted so strongly to the Somerton Man's image? Why did her answers feel rehearsed, her silences loaded with meaning? Jessica's son, a bright and solitary child, became an object of speculation too. Some noted his resemblance to the dead man, his eyes, his chin, the shape of his ears. The theory that the Somerton Man was his father took root, whispered in back rooms and printed in scandal sheets. Jessica, when confronted with these rumors, grew even more withdrawn, her answers clipped, her eyes hard. The detectives returned, again and again, hoping time would loosen her tongue. Each visit yielded the same polite stonewalling, the same insistence that she knew nothing. But the tension in her posture, the tremor in her hands, told a different story. It was as if she were carrying a burden too heavy to share, a truth that could not be spoken without shattering the fragile peace she had built. The case files grew thick with notes on Jessica Thompson, her routines, her acquaintances, her movements on the night the Somerton Man died. Yet every line of inquiry circled back to the same impasse, a woman who denied everything, but whose every gesture betrayed a secret. In the end, Jessica's silence became as much a part of the mystery as the coded lines in the rebellion or the untraceable thread in the dead man's pocket. She outlived the investigation, refusing interviews, never wavering from her story. But those who looked into her eyes, even for a moment, came away convinced that she knew more than she would ever say, that the answer to the Somerton Man's riddle lay not in the sands of Somerton Beach, but in the locked chambers of her memory. The battered rebellion had already transformed the Somerton Man case from an ordinary mystery into a riddle for the ages, but it was the code, those 5 lines of seemingly random capital letters faintly penciled inside the back cover, that would push the investigation into the realm of the surreal. The cipher was not just a curiosity, it was a challenge, a taunt from beyond the grave, and it would come to haunt cryptographers, detectives, and conspiracy theorists for generations. The code read: Gobat, Liawi, Tpimpinip, Liaboayak, Hidden Samskap. Some lines were struck through, some letters underlined, as if the writer had been interrupted or changed his mind. The arrangement was deliberate, the hand steady, but the meaning was utterly opaque. No one, neither the detectives nor the scholars brought in to consult, could say for certain what it represented. Was it an acronym, a substitution cipher, a personal shorthand? Or was it, as some would later suggest, a red-herringed and intentional dead end, meant to mislead? Detective Sergeant Lean stared at the page, his mind racing. He saw in those letters the possibility of answers, but also the specter of deeper, more dangerous secrets. The code was sent to the Navy's cryptographic section, to university mathematicians, to amateur code breakers across Australia. Each group approached the puzzle with confidence, certain that their expertise would unlock the truth. Each, in turn, was defeated. The press seized on the story, and soon the code was splashed across front pages nationwide. Secret cipher and beach mystery. Is this the key? Read one headline. The public, already transfixed by the case's layers of intrigue, now had a new obsession. Armchair detectives scribbled solutions in the margins of newspapers, convinced that the answer was just out of reach. But the code resisted all attempts at interpretation. It was, as one cryptographer would later say, a message from the void. As days turned to weeks, the code's very inscrutability began to fuel a new wave of speculation. The Cold War was tightening its grip on the world, and the specter of espionage lurked in every shadow. Was the Somerton Man a spy, his final message encrypted in a book of poetry? Was the code a dead drop, a signal to an unseen handler, a warning that a mission had failed? The detectives, once skeptical, now found themselves entertaining theories that would have seemed absurd just months before. The spy theory gained traction with every unanswered question. The Somerton Man's immaculate appearance, his erased identity, his untraceable possessions all fit the profile of a covert operative. The rebellion, with its meditations on fate and finality, seemed a fitting talisman for a man living on the edge of danger. The code, inscrutable and haunting, became the centerpiece of this narrative, a symbol of secrets kept and lives lost in the service of causes never named. But for all the speculation, the code remained unbroken. The Navy's experts, accustomed to cracking the most complex wartime ciphers, admitted defeat. Linguists and mathematicians proposed patterns, but none fit. Even the world's most advanced computers, decades later, would fail to find a solution. The code was a wall, and behind it, the Somerton Man's true story remained locked away. Jessica Thompson, whose phone number had been found in the book, was questioned again. Did she recognize the code? Had she ever seen similar writing? She denied everything, her answers clipped and cold. But the detectives could not help but notice the tension in her posture, the way her eyes lingered on the page before darting away. If she knew more, she would not say. The code became a legend in its own right, a cipher that defined the case as much as the man himself. It was a riddle that taunted the living, a puzzle that refused to yield. For those who studied it, the code was a window into the mind of a man who had gone to extraordinary lengths to disappear, a man who, in his final moments, had left behind a message that no one could read. The Somerton Man story was now inseparable from the code. It was a tale of secrets and silence, of messages sent and never received. The cipher, handwritten in the back of a battered book, was both a clue and a curse, a reminder that some mysteries are meant to endure, and that the answers we seek may always be just out of reach. By the summer of 1949, the Somerton Man case had become more than a local curiosity, it was a national obsession, and the sense of unease that clung to Adelaide was no longer just about a single dead man on a beach. The world itself had changed in the months since his body was discovered. The Cold War, once a distant rumble, was now a daily reality. Headlines blared of atomic secrets, double agents, and invisible wars fought in the shadows. Against this backdrop, the Somerton Man's silence grew heavier, his secrets more sinister. The clues, when laid out together, seemed almost too perfect for fiction. A man with no identity, every label cut from his clothing, his pockets empty of anything that could tie him to a name or a country. A rare book of Persian poetry, its final page torn away, a phrase meaning ended or finished hidden in a secret pocket. A code, handwritten in careful block letters, that stumped even the Navy's best cryptographers. And a local nurse, her number penciled in the back of the book, whose reaction to the dead man's face was as telling as any confession. The press, sensing a story that tapped into the era's deepest anxieties, began to ask questions that would have seemed paranoid just a year before. Was the Somerton Man a spy? Had he come to Australia on a mission, only to meet his end on a lonely stretch of sand? Or was he the victim of a foreign power, silenced before he could reveal what he knew? The public imagination ran wild, fueled by stories of Soviet infiltration and British intelligence operations, by the knowledge that Adelaide itself was home to the top-secret Woomera rocket range in the nearby Radium Hill uranium mine. Both prime targets for espionage. Detective Sergeant Lean and his team, once skeptical of such theories, found themselves drawn in by the logic of the clues. The Somerton man's physical fitness, his immaculate dress, his lack of calluses or scars, these were the marks of a man trained to blend in, to move through the world without leaving a trace. The foreign thread in his pocket, unavailable in Australia, suggested international connections. The code in the rubaiyat was the final straw. Here was a message that defied all attempts at decryption, a puzzle that seemed designed for the eyes of a single recipient. Rumors spread quickly through Adelaide. Some whispered that the Somerton man had been poisoned with a rare, untraceable toxin, perhaps digitalis or strophanthine, both known to intelligence agencies for their ability to kill without leaving a mark. Others speculated that the book and the code were part of a dead drop, a message meant for another agent who never arrived. The presence of Jessica Thompson, the nurse whose life intersected with the dead man's in ways she refused to explain, only deepened the sense of conspiracy. The Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIO, newly formed and already on high alert for foreign subversion, took a quiet interest in the case. Files were opened, reports were written, and the Somerton man's fingerprints were sent to agencies around the world. The FBI, MI5, and Interpol all responded with the same answer: no match. If the Somerton man was a spy, he was a ghost, trained, perhaps, to be untraceable even in death. For the public, the mystery became a mirror of the times. The Somerton man was not just a victim. He was a symbol of a world where nothing could be trusted, where secrets were currency and the truth was always just out of reach. Adelaide, once a quiet city at the edge of the world, now found itself at the center of a story that seemed to stretch from Moscow to London to Washington. The detectives, for all their dogged work, could not escape the feeling that they were out of their depth. The clues refused to fit together, the witnesses remained silent, and the code still mocked them from the back of the battered book. The possibility of espionage hung over the case like a shadow, coloring every new discovery with suspicion and dread. And so the Somerton man remained what he had always been, an enigma, a cipher, a question that no one could answer. Whether he was a spy, a lover, or a victim of chance, his story was now inseparable from the fears and uncertainties of the age. In the end, it was not just his identity that was lost, but the sense that anything in the world could ever truly be known. As the Somerton man case unfolded, the mystery gripped not just Adelaide, but the entire nation. Newspapers ran daily updates, radio hosts speculated endlessly, and the public, hungry for answers, watched with a mixture of dread and fascination. Yet, for all the attention, the investigation remained mired in the same chilling truth. No one had come forward to claim the body. The man on the beach was not just unidentified, he was unclaimed, unnamed, and, it seemed, utterly alone. Detective Sergeant Lean, exhausted but relentless, took the unprecedented step of launching a public appeal. Photographs of the dead man's face, his distinctive ears, his strong chin and neat hair, were published in every major newspaper across Australia. The police described his clothes in detail, listed his height, his build, the color of his eyes and hair. They even published images of the few personal effects found on his body, the tickets, the combs, the battered pack of cigarettes, hoping that some small detail might spark a memory in a friend, a colleague, a family member. The Somerton man's body, carefully embalmed, was put on display at the Adelaide morgue. Hundreds filed past the glass, searching for a flicker of recognition. Some came out of curiosity, others out of hope or fear. There were mothers with missing sons, wives with vanished husbands, friends haunted by the absence of a mate last seen in a railway station or a city pub. Each one studied the features of the dead man, searching for something familiar. Each one left, shaking their head, unable to bridge the gap between the man on the slab and the person they had lost. Letters poured in from every corner of Australia and even from overseas. Families sent photographs, dental records, and desperate pleas for information. The police compared each submission with methodical care. They checked missing persons files, hospital admissions, and military records. They consulted with dentists, tailors, and even chiropodists, hoping that the man's distinctive wedge-shaped toes or muscular calves might provide a clue. But every lead fizzled. Every comparison failed. The Somerton Man matched no one. The lack of identification became a story in itself. Who was the man on the beach? Asked the headlines, day after day. Theories multiplied. Some believed he was a foreign sailor, a traveler who had met with misfortune far from home. Others insisted he was a fugitive, hiding from enemies who had finally caught up with him. A few, their imaginations fired by the era's paranoia, whispered that he was a spy, an agent whose death was meant to erase his very existence. The psychological toll on the investigators was profound. Lean and his team had solved countless cases before, but never one like this. The Somerton Man seemed to resist all attempts at understanding, his very anonymity a kind of defiance. The detectives began to take the case personally. They worked late into the night, poring over files, revisiting the beach, tracing every rumor and every memory. But the answers remained just out of reach, always slipping away at the last moment. For the public, the case became a mirror for their own anxieties. In a world growing ever more uncertain, the idea that a man could simply vanish from the record, could die without name, history, or kin, was both terrifying and oddly compelling. The Somerton Man was not just a victim. He was a symbol of the age's rootlessness, its fear of the unknown, its suspicion that the world was full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. As weeks turned to months, the authorities faced a grim decision. With no one to claim the body, the Somerton Man was finally buried in a pauper's grave at West Terrace Cemetery. A small crowd gathered for the funeral: police officers, journalists, a handful of curious onlookers. The headstone read simply, "Here lies the unknown man found at Somerton Beach, December 1st, 1948. There were no flowers, no eulogy, no family to mourn him. The city moved on, but the mystery remained. Yet, even in death, the Somerton Man refused to be forgotten. The file stayed open, the questions lingered. Who was he? Where had he come from? Why had no one come forward to claim him? Was he truly alone in the world? Or was there someone, somewhere, who knew the truth, but chose to remain silent? The story of the Somerton Man became a legend, passed down through generations. His face, captured in black and white photographs, haunted the city's collective memory. His grave became a pilgrimage site for the curious and the obsessed. And every so often, a new clue would surface, a rumor, a theory, a scrap of evidence, rekindling hope that the mystery might one day be solved. But for now, the Somerton Man remained what he had always been: unclaimed, unnamed, and utterly inscrutable. A riddle without an answer. A life erased, yet forever remembered. By the dawn of the 1950s, the Somerton Man was no longer just a mystery for Adelaide or even for Australia. The story had leapt oceans, crossing borders and languages, captivating imaginations from London to Los Angeles, from Moscow to Mumbai. What had begun as a local enigma, a dead man on a quiet beach, had become a global puzzle, its every detail scrutinized by experts, journalists, and the public alike. The international press seized on the case. Drawn by its perfect storm of intrigue, the man found dead, his identity erased, carrying a Persian poem and a code no one could break. British tabloids speculated wildly, their headlines screaming of the beach body riddle. In America, radio programs devoted entire hours to the Tamám Shud mystery, inviting listeners to send in their own solutions. In Europe, where the scars of war and the new wounds of the Cold War were fresh, the story was seen as a parable of the age, an era where anyone could be a spy, and anyone could vanish without a trace. Theories proliferated, each more elaborate than the last. Some saw the Somerton Man as a tragic romantic, a man driven to suicide by heartbreak or loss. They pointed to the Rebellion, with its meditations on fate and the futility of life, and to the phrase "Tamám Shud" ended, finished, secreted in his pocket like a final, poetic farewell. Perhaps, they argued, he had come to the beach to die alone, his last act a gesture of existential defiance. Others, however, saw a darker story. The code in the book, the erased labels, the foreign thread, the nurse who flinched at the sight of his face, all these, they insisted, pointed to assassination. The world was awash in stories of double agents and secret missions. In the shadowy world of espionage, death was often delivered quietly, without witnesses or explanation. The Somerton Man, in this telling, was a casualty of a war fought in silence, a man who knew too much, or who had failed in his mission, silenced by a poison that left no trace. Intelligence agencies took notice. The Australian Security Intelligence Organization, ASIO, barely a year old, opened a file on the case. MI5 and the CIA made discreet inquiries, requesting fingerprints and photographs. Soviet defectors, questioned years later, would mention the case in passing, their answers evasive, their smiles thin. The Somerton Man became a ghost story among spies, a reminder that in their world, even the dead could keep secrets. The public, meanwhile, was enthralled. Letters arrived at the Adelaide police station from every continent, filled with theories, confessions, and pleas for information. Some claimed to recognize the dead man as a missing relative or a wartime acquaintance. Others offered elaborate solutions to the code, convinced they had found the key to the mystery. A few, their handwriting shaky with age or illness, simply asked for reassurance. Could it happen to me? Could I disappear and no one know my name? For the detectives, the global attention was both a blessing and a curse. Every new theory brought a surge of hope, a sense that the answer was just around the corner. But each one also brought fresh disappointment, another dead end in a case already choked with them. The investigation sprawled across continents, but the Somerton Man remained stubbornly rooted in the sands of Somerton Beach, silent, inscrutable, and alone. As the years passed, the case became a legend retold in books, documentaries, and whispered conversations. It was a story that belonged to everyone and to no one, a riddle without an answer, a mirror for the fears and obsessions of a world in flux. The Somerton Man was a cipher, his life and death a puzzle that spanned the globe, inviting everyone to try their hand and daring anyone to solve it. Yet, for all the theories, for all the attention, the essential truth remained untouched. The Somerton Man was still unclaimed, unnamed, and unexplained. His story was a testament to the limits of knowledge, a reminder that even in an age of information, some mysteries endure, silent, patient, and eternal. As the Somerton Man story spread across Australia and beyond, the investigation was reinvigorated by a discovery that seemed almost mundane at first: a brown suitcase, left unclaimed at the Adelaide railway station. It was January 14, 1949, 6 weeks after the body had been found, when railway staff, reviewing the station's lost property, noticed the battered case had sat untouched in the cloakroom since the morning of November 30th, the day before the Somerton Man was discovered on the beach. Detective Sergeant Lee and his team were summoned. The suitcase, tagged simply "left luggage," was opened with a mixture of hope and dread. Inside, the contents were as ordinary and as perplexing as everything else in the case. There were clothes, neatly folded, pajamas, undergarments, a dressing gown, slippers, a tie, and a singlet. There were shaving items, a screwdriver, a table knife that had been cut down into a sharp instrument, and a pair of scissors. There was a stenciling brush, a small square of zinc, and a spool of the same rare orange wax thread used to repair the pocket of the Somerton Man's trousers. But, as with the man's clothing, every label had been removed from the suitcase's contents. No name, no initials, no address. The suitcase itself was a common brand, sold widely across Australia. The detectives pored over every item, searching for clues. The stenciling brush and the modified knife stood out, tools of a trade, perhaps, but which trade? Was he a sign painter, a craftsman, or, as some now suspected, a man trained to alter his appearance and tools as needed? The orange thread was a revelation. It matched exactly the repair in the dead man's trousers, a link that, though circumstantial, was strong enough to convince the police that the suitcase belonged to the Somerton Man. The thread itself was not available in Australia and had to be imported, suggesting international travel or connections. The detectives traced the thread to a single importer in Melbourne, but the records offered no further clues. Among the toiletries was a small brush labeled "clean," the only item with any kind of marking. Yet even this led nowhere. No one named Keane was reported missing, and no one by that name matched the Somerton Man's appearance. Some speculated it was a misprint or a deliberate misdirection. The suitcase's contents were sent for forensic examination. The clothing was of good quality, but unremarkable. The shaving kit was standard, the slippers well-worn. The modified knife, its blade ground down to a stub, was sharp enough to be used as a weapon, or perhaps as a tool for something more mundane. The stenciling brush and zinc square suggested a man who worked with his hands, but the lack of calluses on the Somerton man's fingers contradicted this. The detectives canvassed hotels, boarding houses, and hostels near the station. Had anyone seen a man matching the description, carrying a brown suitcase? Had anyone checked in and then disappeared? The answers were always the same. No one remembered. No one had seen anything unusual. The suitcase, like the man, seemed to have appeared out of thin air. The press seized on the new development. "Suitcase may hold key to beach mystery," blared the headlines. The public, already enthralled by the case's twists and turns, poured over the list of contents, searching for meaning in the mundane. Was the Somerton man a craftsman, a traveler, a spy? Or was the suitcase a plant, left to confuse the investigation and muddy the waters? For the detectives, the suitcase was both a breakthrough and a frustration. It was the first tangible link between the dead man and the world he had left behind, but it offered no answers, only more questions. The items inside were as carefully curated as the man's appearance, as deliberately anonymous as his possessions. The suitcase was a microcosm of the case itself, ordinary objects, arranged in a way that defied explanation. As the investigation pressed on, the suitcase became a symbol of the Somerton man's enduring enigma. It was a container for secrets, a vessel for the unknown. Every item inside was a clue, and yet none led to the truth. The detectives, methodical and relentless, refused to give up. They traced every thread, followed every lead, but the answers remained just out of reach. The Somerton man's story, already a labyrinth of riddles, had gained a new chamber, a suitcase at the station, filled with oddities and silence. And as the city of Adelaide watched and waited, the question grew louder. Who was the man on the beach, and what story did his suitcase tell? The brown suitcase from Adelaide railway station was a trove of oddities, but it was the spool of orange wax thread that most unsettled the detectives. It was not the most dramatic item, no weapon, no passport, not even a photograph. Yet, as they lifted the spool from the suitcase, its significance crystallized with a chill that ran down every spine in the room. This was no ordinary thread. It was the same rare, vibrant orange wax thread used to repair a pocket in the Somerton man's trousers, a pocket that had concealed the cryptic Tamám Shud scrap. The match was exact, and it was the only item in the suitcase that could be directly linked to the dead man's body. Detective Sergeant Lean turned the spool over in his hands, examining the label. The thread was smooth, strong, and slightly sticky to the touch, its color a brilliant, almost unnatural orange. It was unlike any thread available in local shops. The detectives consulted with Adelaide's tailors and haberdashers, but none recognized it. It was not a product of any Australian manufacturer. The search expanded to import records, and finally, a breakthrough. The thread was traced to a single supplier in Melbourne who had imported a small quantity from the United Kingdom. The batch was rare, expensive, and had only been distributed to a handful of shops in Australia. None could recall selling it to a man matching the Somerton man's description. The repair in the trousers was meticulous, neat, almost invisible from the outside, but unmistakable to a tailor's trained eye. Whoever had made the repair had done so with care, threading the needle with the same orange wax thread now found in the suitcase. The implication was clear. The suitcase belonged to the Somerton man. The thread was the connective tissue, binding the lifeless body on the beach to the anonymous luggage at the station. But the thread raised as many questions as it answered. Why would a man go to such lengths to repair his clothing with a thread so rare it was almost impossible to find? Was it a mark of pride, a sign of resourcefulness? Or did it speak to something more calculated, a deliberate attempt to leave no trace, no ordinary clue that could be easily followed? Or was it simply what he had on hand, a remnant from a life lived in many places, always on the move. The detectives considered every angle. The orange thread was not just a practical item, it was a symbol of the case's strangeness. It was out of place, out of time, a foreign object in an otherwise ordinary scene. It hinted at international travel, at connections beyond Australia's shores. It suggested a man who had lived elsewhere, who had access to goods unavailable to most Australians in 1948. Was he a sailor, a traveler, a man of means? Or was he, as the spy theories now swirling around the case suggested, someone whose life depended on being able to blend in and disappear at a moment's notice? The public, when the detail was released, seized on the thread as another tantalizing clue. Letters to the editor speculated on its meaning. Some saw it as evidence of foreign espionage, a spy's toolkit, assembled from the rarest and most untraceable materials. Others saw it as a sign of the man's meticulous nature, his need for control in a world of chaos. The orange thread became a symbol, a motif that would recur in every retelling of the Somerton Man story. For the detectives, the discovery was bittersweet. The thread tied the suitcase to the body, but it did not bring them any closer to a name, a motive, or a cause of death. It was a clue that pointed everywhere and nowhere, a detail that deepened the mystery rather than resolved it. The investigation pressed on, but the orange thread remained a stubborn knot, impossible to untangle, impossible to ignore. As the months passed, the thread took on a life of its own. It was discussed in police briefings, in newspaper columns, in the whispered conversations of those obsessed with the case. It was a detail that refused to fade, a reminder that even the smallest, most innocuous object could hold the key to a mystery, or to its eternal frustration. In the end, the orange wax thread was both a link and a barrier. It connected the Somerton Man to his suitcase, to the city of Adelaide, to the world beyond. But it also stood as a testament to the case's enduring enigma, a bright, unbreakable line running through the heart of a story that would never be fully unraveled. In the months that followed the Somerton Man's burial, the investigation entered a strange new phase, one marked not by fresh evidence, but by the obsessive scrutiny of every detail of the man's body. With no name, no past, and no clear cause of death, the detectives and the public alike began to look for meaning in the physical form itself, as if the body might yield secrets that the mind and the world had conspired to erase. It was Dr. John Dwyer, the pathologist, who first drew attention to the dead man's legs. During the autopsy, Dwyer noted with some surprise the pronounced development of the calf muscles that were not just strong, but almost sculpted, their shape more akin to those of a ballet dancer or a long-distance runner than to an ordinary man. The man's feet, too, were unusual. The toes were wedge-shaped, the big toe angled and toward the others, as if accustomed to years spent in tight, pointed shoes. There were no calluses, no scars, no signs of manual labor. The hands were smooth, the nails manicured, the skin soft and unblemished. The details, at first, seemed incidental, a curiosity to be noted in the autopsy report, nothing more. But as the case grew colder, these physical peculiarities took on a life of their own. The press seized on them, and soon the city was abuzz with speculation. Was the Somerton Man a professional dancer, his body shaped by years of training and performance? Was he an athlete, a man whose discipline and grace had left their mark on his flesh? Detective Sergeant Lean, ever methodical, interviewed local dance instructors and athletic coaches. He showed them photographs of the man's legs, described the shape of his feet, the cut of his calves. The responses were cautious, but consistent. Yes, it was possible. The development of the muscles, the alignment of the toes, these were the hallmarks of a dancer, perhaps even a ballet dancer. One instructor, after examining the evidence, remarked, "You don't get legs like that from walking. You get them from years of practice, years of holding your weight on the balls of your feet, of leaping and landing, of discipline and repetition." The theory took hold in the public imagination. Newspapers ran illustrations of the Somerton Man in a dancer's pose, speculating about his lost career. Was he a star who had fled the stage, a performer who had traveled the world and then vanished into obscurity? Or was he a man on the run, hiding his talents as carefully as he had hidden his identity? Yet, as with every clue in the case, the dancer theory raised as many questions as it answered. If the Somerton Man had been a dancer, why was there no record of him in any company or troupe? Why had no one come forward to claim him, a fellow performer, a teacher, a friend? The world of dance was small and close-knit, especially in post-war Australia. A man with such distinctive features, such skill, would not have gone unnoticed. The detectives considered other possibilities. Perhaps he had been a gymnast, a fencer, or a military man, someone whose life demanded both strength and grace. The shape of his feet, the condition of his hands, the care with which he dressed, all suggested a man accustomed to discipline, to presenting himself to the world with precision and pride. But the theory also had a psychological dimension. The idea of the Somerton Man as a dancer, a figure of elegance and mystery, moving through the world with silent purpose, captured something essential about the case. He was, in a sense, performing even in death, his body arranged with care, his secrets hidden behind a mask of composure. The dancer was a metaphor for the mystery itself, a story told in gestures and silences, in the language of the body rather than the tongue. The public fascination grew. Letters poured in from as far as London and New York, from dancers and athletes who saw in the Somerton Man a reflection of their own lives, the sacrifices, the discipline, the loneliness that sometimes came with a life devoted to art or sport. Some claimed to recognize him, to remember a man with those legs, those feet, that bearing. But none of the leads panned out. The Somerton Man remained alone, his story untold. For the detectives, the dancer theory was both a comfort and a torment. It offered a glimpse of a life, a history that might explain the body on the beach, the suitcase at the station, the orange thread, the code in the book. But it was a history that could not be confirmed, a story that could not be told. The Somerton Man was a dancer, perhaps, but he was also a ghost, a figure moving through the world unseen, leaving only the faintest trace behind. In the end, the dancer theory became another layer in the legend. It was a story that spoke to the heart of the mystery, the sense that the Somerton Man had lived a life of discipline and beauty, of secrets and sorrow, a life that ended, as all performances must, with the curtain falling on a silent, empty stage. As the decades slipped by, the Somerton Man's grave remained undisturbed in West Terrace Cemetery, its modest stone a silent challenge to the living. The world changed around him, television flickered into Australian homes, the Cold War thawed, new generations were born and grew old. But the mystery on Somerton Beach only deepened. With every passing year, the case became less a matter of police work and more a riddle for the ages, a puzzle that haunted the collective imagination of a nation. By the late 20th century, the tools of forensic science had advanced far beyond what Detective Sergeant Lean and his team could have dreamed. DNA analysis, once the stuff of science fiction, now promised to unlock secrets from the grave. Cold case squads, armed with new techniques and a sense of unfinished business, began to revisit the Somerton Man. The hope was simple, that a fragment of bone, a hair, a trace of tissue might finally reveal his name. The first attempts were cautious, almost reverent. In the 1990s, forensic experts exhumed the body, careful not to disturb the grave more than necessary. They took samples, teeth, hair, bone, and sent them to the best laboratories in Australia and overseas. The process was slow, the results agonizingly inconclusive. The DNA was degraded, the markers faked. There were hints, shadows of ancestry, but nothing that could be matched to a living relative or a missing persons report. The Somerton Man remained as anonymous in the laboratory as he had been on the sand. The years rolled on. Technology leapt forward again. Mitochondrial DNA analysis, Y chromosome sequencing, and autosomal DNA testing became available. Each new advance brought a surge of hope, a sense that the answer was finally within reach. But each time, the results were the same: partial profiles, incomplete matches, tantalizing suggestions that dissolved under scrutiny. The Somerton Man's DNA was a ghost in the machine, a code that refused to be broken. The public followed each development with breathless anticipation. Documentaries chronicled the latest tests, newspapers ran headlines with every new theory. Forensic genealogists, inspired by successes in other cold cases, scoured online databases, searching for a distant cousin, a shared ancestor, a family tree that might lead back to the man in the suit. But the matches were always too distant, the branches too tangled. Without a name, without a living relative to compare, the mystery endured. The psychological toll of these dead ends was profound. For the scientists and detectives who devoted years, sometimes decades, of their lives to the case, the Somerton Man became a personal obsession. They spoke of him not as a corpse, but as a presence, a question that haunted their dreams. Some saw him as a symbol of the limits of human knowledge, a reminder that not every story could be solved by science or reason. Others saw him as a challenge, a riddle that demanded an answer, no matter how many years it took. The case became a touchstone for the evolution of forensic science itself. Each failed test, each inconclusive result, was a lesson in humility, a reminder that even in an age of genetic miracles, some secrets were too well kept. The Somerton Man's DNA was compared to thousands of profiles, run through databases in Australia, the UK, the US, and beyond. The results were always the same: no match, no name, no closure. And yet, the mystery refused to die. If anything, the failure of science to resolve the case only made it more compelling. The Somerton Man became a legend, a ghost story told in university lecture halls and forensic conferences, a symbol of the enduring power of the unknown. His face, reconstructed again and again by artists and computers, stared out from television screens and magazine covers, a reminder that some mysteries are eternal. In the 2020s, a new wave of interest swept the case. Advances in forensic genealogy, the same techniques that had unmasked the Golden State Killer, were brought to bear on the Somerton Man teams of experts, some working independently, others in collaboration with law enforcement. Re-examined the evidence. They built family trees from the faintest scraps of DNA, tracing lines of descent across continents and centuries. There were moments of hope, whispers of a breakthrough, but still the final piece was missing. The Somerton Man's identity remained just out of reach, a name on the tip of the world's tongue that would not be spoken. For the city of Adelaide, the case was both a source of pride and a lingering wound. The Somerton Man was their mystery, their legend, their unsolved crime. Tourists visited his grave, leaving flowers and notes, while locals debated the latest theories in cafes and living rooms. The detectives who had worked the case grew old and retired, their files passed down to new generations, each convinced they might be the one to solve it. But the Somerton Man remained elusive. His DNA, his body, his story, a puzzle that defied solution. The dead ends multiplied, the years slipped by, and still the question echoed: who was the man on the beach? Why had he died alone, his secret so carefully guarded? Was he a victim, a fugitive, a spy, or simply a man who wished to disappear? In the end, the failure to identify the Somerton Man became part of his legend. He was a symbol of the limits of science, the persistence of mystery, the enduring fascination of the unknown. His story was a reminder that even in an age of information, some riddles endure not because they cannot be solved, but because they refuse to be forgotten. For decades, the Somerton Man story had been a puzzle of codes, suitcases, and secrets, its center as cold and inscrutable as the day his body was found. But as the 20th century faded and the 21st began, a new theory emerged, one that shifted the focus from international intrigue to intimate, human drama. It was a theory that would cast long shadows over the case and over the family at its heart. The story began to change when researchers, poring over old photographs and forensic reports, noticed something uncanny, a striking resemblance between the Somerton Man and Robin Thompson, the son of Jessica Thompson, the Glenelg nurse whose phone number had been found in the rebellion. Robin, born in 1947, had grown up in the same modest house where detectives had once questioned his mother. He had never known his father, and Jessica had never spoken of him. As the years passed, Robin became a man of accomplishment, a skilled ballet dancer, known for his athleticism and grace. But it was not just his profession that drew attention. Photographs of Robin as a young man revealed the same unusual features noted in the Somerton Man's autopsy: a pronounced jaw, a distinctive shape to the ears, and the rare dental anomaly known as hypodontia, missing lateral incisors, a trait found in less than 2% of the population. The resemblance was more than passing. It was, to some, undeniable. The theory took hold in the public imagination. Could Robin Thompson be the Somerton Man's son? If so, what did that mean for Jessica's role in the mystery? Had she lied to the police out of fear, or to protect her child from a truth too dangerous to reveal? The questions multiplied, each more personal and painful than the last. Geneticists and forensic genealogists joined the search. With Jessica and Robin both deceased, the task was delicate, requiring the cooperation of surviving relatives and the careful extraction of DNA from old hairbrushes, letters, and photographs. The tests were complex, the results slow to emerge. But the tantalizing possibility remained that the answer to the Somerton man's identity lay not in secret codes or international espionage, but in the quiet streets of Glenelg, in the life of a woman who had always seemed to know more than she would say. For the Thompson family, the theory was both a revelation and a burden. Robin's daughter, Rachel, found herself at the center of a media storm, her family's history dissected by journalists and amateur sleuths. She agreed to provide a DNA sample, hoping to bring closure to a mystery that had haunted her family for generations. The process was agonizing, months of waiting, of speculation, of hope and dread entwined. The results, when they came, were inconclusive, suggestive, but not definitive. The shared traits, the circumstantial evidence, the whispers of family resemblance all pointed to a connection, but the final proof remained elusive. Still, for many, the emotional truth was clear. The Somerton man was not just a cipher, a victim of Cold War paranoia. He was a father, a lover, a man whose life and death had shaped the lives of those left behind. The theory cast Jessica Thompson's silence in a new light. Had she recognized the dead man not as a stranger, but as the father of her child? Had she kept a secret to protect Robin, or to shield herself from scandal and danger? The questions lingered, unresolved, adding a new layer of poignancy to the case. For the public, the revelation was both satisfying and unsettling. It humanized the Somerton man, grounding his story in the ordinary tragedies of love and loss. But it also deepened the mystery, raising new questions about identity, loyalty, and the lengths to which people will go to protect those they love. In the end, the possibility that Robin Thompson was the Somerton man's son did not solve the case. It did, however, transform it, turning a global puzzle into a family saga, a story not just of secrets and spies, but of fathers and sons, of mothers and memories, of the ties that bind us even beyond death. The Somerton man's grave remained unmarked by name, but his legacy lived on in the faces of those who bore his features, in the questions that refused to die, and in the hope that, one day, the final piece of the puzzle might at last fall into place. The decades have rolled by, and still the Somerton man lies in his modest grave, the inscription on his headstone as stark and unresolved as the day it was carved. Here lies the unknown man found at Somerton Beach, December 1st, 1948. The world has changed around him. Wars ended, empires crumbled, the digital age dawned and flourished. Yet the mystery of his life and death remains untouched, a silent challenge to the living and a testament to the limits of human knowledge. For generations, the Somerton man has been more than just a cold case. He has become a symbol, a cipher, a story retold in whispers and headlines, in books and documentaries, in the quiet musings of those who find themselves drawn to the allure of the unsolved. His story is not just about a man found dead on a beach, but about the enduring hunger for answers, the ache of not knowing, and the strange comfort found in the persistence of mystery. In Adelaide, his legend is woven into the city's fabric. Locals pass by West Terrace Cemetery and pause at his grave, some leaving flowers, others notes or tokens, gestures of recognition for a man whose face is more familiar to them than many of their own ancestors. Tourists seek out the site, guided by curiosity and the haunting black and white photographs that have circulated for decades. The grave is not grand, but it is visited, and in that act of remembrance, the Somerton man is never truly alone. The story has inspired countless theories, each generation layering new interpretations onto the old. Was he a spy, a lover, a fugitive, or a victim of his own despair? Was his death a carefully orchestrated act of international intrigue, or a solitary, poetic exit from a world that had grown too heavy to bear? The clues, the rebayet, the code, the orange thread, the suitcase remain as tantalizing and ambiguous as ever, each one a mirror reflecting the fears and hopes of those who study them. Forensic science, with all its promise, has been humbled by the case. DNA analysis, advanced genealogical mapping, and digital facial reconstruction have all been brought to bear, each new technology greeted with hope and ultimately with disappointment. The Somerton Man's identity remains elusive, his origins obscured by time, and the deliberate erasure of every label, every trace. The dead ends have become part of the story, a reminder that some mysteries resist even the most determined efforts to solve them. But perhaps it is this very resistance that gives the Somerton Man his enduring power. In a world increasingly obsessed with answers, with closure, with the illusion that every question can be resolved, his story stands as a quiet rebuke. Not every life can be neatly catalogued. Not every death can be explained. There are secrets that endure, not because they are unsolvable, but because they are part of the human condition, the need to wonder, to imagine, to seek meaning in what cannot be known. The Somerton Man's legacy is not just one of frustration, but of fascination. He has inspired artists, writers, and musicians. He has drawn together communities of amateur sleuths and professional investigators, united by the shared thrill of the chase. His story has become a canvas onto which we project our own questions about identity, belonging, and the nature of truth. In his silence, he speaks to the universal fear of being forgotten and the equally powerful hope that our stories, even if untold, will matter to someone. For the families who have searched for missing loved ones, the Somerton Man is a symbol of the pain of not knowing, the endless ache of absence. For the scientists and detectives who have devoted years to his case, he is a reminder of the humility required in the face of the unknown. For the city of Adelaide, he is a legend, an unsolved chapter, a ghost who walks the edge of the sea. And so, the Somerton Man endures. His story is retold, re-examined, reimagined, but never resolved. He is the riddle at the heart of the city, the question that lingers long after the headlines have faded. In the quiet hours, when the world seems particularly mysterious, his image returns, a well-dressed man on a lonely beach, his secrets intact, his story unfinished. He is, and will remain, the legacy of enigma, a haunting symbol of the mysteries that define us, and the hope that, one day, even the most stubborn questions may yield their answers to those who refuse to stop asking.